sides of the political aisle fight it out for power.
Bringing you the analysis that you need
Thoughtfully, with context.
be part of the conversation.
On CBS News Streaming.
Welcome to America Decides, Monday through Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern.
This is CBS.
The justices ruled that Harvard and the University of North Carolina violated the Constitution.
In the aftermath of the Supreme Court decision to end affirmative action in college admissions, uncertainty sets in for some students of color.
Affirmative action really gave us an equal opportunity.
CBS Reports explores the historic decision and what it means for those chasing an opportunity to change their lives.
I knew that college was the ticket to break this cycle.
The end of affirmative action, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
When weather turns extreme.
The threat of severe storms and dangerous tornadoes is expected to last
the seventh straight day of terrifying weather.
CBS News and the Weather Channel bring you virtual weather technology so advanced, so real.
Now 6 feet of water, imagine that. Cars that can act like battering rams.
These hyper-realistic simulations show you what the weather will look and feel like before it happens.
Feel the forecast, streaming on CBS News.
The film we'd set out to make was a story of a comedy superstar turned president.
There's currently a major Russian buildup.
The war in Ukraine has begun.
We are looking at people who want to live in our country.
Everything that happens here is going to affect every other place in the world.
When stakes are so high, we will keep fighting.
You were born for this moment.
I'm ready to win.
There's nothing nice about her. The greatest president in my lifetime, she said. I will never run against him.
It's the chaos that surrounds him. He goes off the teleprompter, and you're going to mock my husband who's deployed?
Along with the legal conclusion comes this flood of characterizations, factual misstatements, pejorative comments about the president that are inconsistent with DOJ policy and norms.
Hello, I'm Robert Costa in Washington. Welcome to America Decides. Former President Trump has requested a stay of the appeals court ruling that denied his request for immunity from federal prosecution. We'll get to that breaking news in a moment. But first, we have a brand new CBS News poll of the race in South Carolina. CBS News polling now shows that former President Donald Trump holds a 35-point advantage in the Palmetto State. It doesn't seem like Nikki Haley, the former ambassador, is getting a home state bump. In fact, 75% of South Carolina Republicans told CBS News that Haley being from South Carolina makes no difference to them in terms of their vote. CBS News Executive Director of Elections and Surveys, Anthony Salvanto, joins us now. Anthony, thanks for being here. So it is Ambassador Haley's home state, but it's not seeming to give her much of an advantage, if any. In fact, she's back, way back. What explains that?
Nope. And we came right out and asked that. Bob, does it matter to you as a voter that she's from South Carolina? And as you said at the top, 3/4 said no, it doesn't make a difference. And then it gives you a picture of the nationalization of this race when you look at this. One, the overwhelming numbers say they're voting on national issues, not South Carolina issues. And then this, looking back, Haley gets a positive net rating for how she handled her job as governor from the South Carolina voters. Okay, but even more of them, and I'll point you to this 82%, look back at Donald Trump's presidency and give him their an even higher approval rating. So, yes, Haley's seen positively, Trump as president even more so, and that explains some of that lack of a home state advantage, Bob.
Anthony, former Ambassador Haley has started in recent weeks to level a lot of critiques of former President Trump in her campaign. You've tested some of those critiques. Are they resonating with Republican voters?
I have, and I'm going to show you this one right off the bat because it's really topical. Is Donald Trump fit to be president if he gets convicted of a crime? And you look at the lopsided number of these voters who say yes. In fact, in their minds, he still would be fit. That's one of the things that Nikki Haley's been talking about, but it isn't resonating with voters there. In fact, if you look at Trump voters and ask them, are those legal fights or any kind of concern about them reason enough to maybe consider Nikki Haley, you get this lopsided number who say, no, it is not, Bob.
And finally, Anthony, we're about more than a week out from the South Carolina primary. What can change, if anything, between now and then?
Well, I'll tell you, as a pollster, I usually like to say things can always change. But having said that, I'm going to show you a thing what the voters are saying right here. Where are you firmly decided? Could you still change your mind? And you've got lopsided numbers for both candidates that say they're firmly decided. So it is going to be an uphill fight for Haley. And she's getting about the same percent in South Carolina that we've seen her get in national polling. So again, it echoes that idea that this is a very nationalized race from here, Bob.
Anthony Salvanto, thank you. CBS News political correspondent Caitlin Huey-Burns joins us now from South Carolina. Caitlin, great to see you. Let's begin by listening to your conversation today with former Ambassador Haley about her campaign.
You have had a front row seat to Donald Trump and his presidency. Do you take Donald Trump at his word when it comes to what he said about NATO?
I absolutely take him at his word, because in the last administration, he threatened to get out of NATO multiple times. He truly believes that. In his last administration, and it's not because I'm running for president, you can go look at my last in the book With All Due Respect. I make it very clear that I had to sit down with him and say he had to stop the bromance that was happening with Putin and Russia. I saw the press conference the two of them had. I said, this is not right. This is not normal. And you look at the situation, the idea that he would side with Putin, a man who kills his opponents, a man who is holding Evan Gersovich prisoner right now just for doing his journalistic job, a man who has never been shy about saying he wants to defeat America, and you're going to choose him over an ally that was with us after 9/11? Think about that. NATO has been a success story for 75 years. Russia has never invaded a NATO country because Russia's intimidated by that alliance. China's even intimidated by that alliance. Why would you go and put that alliance in harm's way? Why wouldn't, if you do care about making them pay more, talk about it behind closed doors? But think about it. He goes 2 minutes off script from a teleprompter. And that's how unhinged and that's how undisciplined he comes out sounding. That's a problem.
Are you concerned about this provoking something bigger if he were president?
The reason I'm concerned is, on one side, yes, it's from my national security side. When I was at the UN, I know the dangers. I dealt with Russia, China, and Iran every day. But it's also from a personal side. My husband is a veteran. I'm a military spouse. We're a club. Military families stick together. The last thing we want is for our loved ones to go to war. When you say something like that, not only do you endanger our allies, you endanger every man and woman that serves in the military. There's not one of them right now that listens to him say that doesn't feel like America doesn't have their back.
I want to ask you about your husband, because the former president did attack him, criticize him. Are those comments disqualifying?
I think you have to look at the fact that, again, it's him unhinged. It's the chaos that surrounds him. He goes off the teleprompter, and you're going to mock my husband who's deployed 8,000 miles away? I mean, South Carolina is a heavy military state. We are proud of our men and women here. But these men and women, it's not just them that sacrifice, their families sacrifice. And if they're willing to go and shed blood for the freedoms that we hold dear, for the country that we're so blessed to live in, what does that say about someone who wants to be commander-in-chief? Because as a military spouse, it makes me worry about Michael's safety.
Caitlin, great exchange with former Ambassador Haley as you work the campaign trail. Beyond talking to the candidates, you're talking to voters. And in South Carolina, as your exchange detailed, this is a military state in many respects, a lot of military families. Are voters paying more attention to Trump's comments about someone serving right now in uniform, Nikki Haley's husband, Michael, or are they paying more attention to the differences on foreign policy between Haley and Trump, which are real?
Yeah, Bob, it's a good question. And we have seen this divide in the Republican Party, especially when it comes to how to handle Ukraine. And you've seen increasingly over the past several months, Republicans move away from a hawkish view and questioning this kind of spending. You heard from Republicans on Capitol Hill coming to Donald Trump's defense on his comments on NATO. And that's why I asked Nikki Haley if she took Trump at his word. What's interesting about South Carolina here, and our poll reflects that, is even when you talk to voters who supported Nikki Haley as governor, that doesn't necessarily translate to national support. And we see that in our poll. When I was here a couple of weeks ago, right after the New Hampshire primary, I talked to voters who said that they liked her as governor, but they were kind of leaning towards Trump because he was experienced as president. So this is an uphill climb for her, as our poll shows, but she's on a bus tour over the past couple of days and on to tomorrow, really trying to capture every vote that she can. And what we've seen today, especially, is that she really has ramped up those attacks against Trump. Earlier today, she called him unqualified. And speaking of her husband's military service, she said that the closest that Donald Trump has ever gotten to a dangerous situation is maybe getting hit by a golf ball at Mar-a-Lago. And so you're seeing those attacks ramp up. But as our polling shows, this is a big hill for her to climb. She also said, I asked about her path, how long she's going to stay in this. She says she's in this at least through Super Tuesday and wants to close the gap here in South Carolina. So nobody is projecting any sort of victory here, but narrowing that big gap seems to be the goal.
Caitlin Huey-Burns, thank you very much. CBS News Chief Washington Correspondent Major Garrett joins us now here at the table. Major, let's go back to the issue of former President Trump. I want to play for you some comments he made about NATO in recent days. Let's listen.
One of the presidents of a big country stood up and said, well, sir, if we don't pay and we're attacked by Russia, will you protect us? I said, you didn't pay? You're delinquent? He said, yes, let's say that happened. No, I would not protect you. In fact, I would encourage them to do whatever the hell they want. You got to pay. You got to pay your bills.
Let's just go over that quote one more time. Yeah. In fact, I would, quote, encourage them to do whatever the hell they want. Former President Trump talking about the scenario of a delinquent NATO ally in terms of an attack from Russia. Does it just fade into the wind in terms of this campaign, or is this a moment where some Republicans and others start to say, maybe there are some issues here?
Okay. I don't think Republicans will decide the South Carolina primary or any other primary in the immediate future based on this. That doesn't mean it will not have real-world ramifications. And this is more than Trump has ever said. I covered President Trump. I went to NATO summits.
Written multiple books about him.
I saw the interaction. It's worth putting on the record that the push for NATO members to increase their annual defense spending began during the Obama administration. That message was first and most harshly delivered by then Defense Secretary Robert Gates. It's been a U.S. concern for quite a while, but President Trump is much louder about it. He's much more abrasive about it. And for Trump's supporters, they believe he made good on it. He rattled NATO's cage and made them spend more on joint defense. And if he hadn't been there, those budgets would not have been as fortified as they are now. What's different about this is do whatever the hell you want. Whoa. That's not what NATO's about. That's not what the post-World War II European security understanding of NATO is about. And that's why I'm talking about real-world ramifications. If you're Vladimir Putin and you hear that, and you're thinking about the Baltics, as he always does, those are his words, not mine, this is the kind of thing that sounds, if not like an invitation, a kind of low-level permission slip. And that is why this has real-world ramifications if former President Trump becomes the nominee and moves ever closer to the U.S. presidency.
When we step away from the race and you think about if Trump wins another term in the White House, what would this mean for U.S. foreign policy? If you have a president who believes what Trump just said verbatim.
So, on one level, and I guarantee you, Trump supporters and the former president, if he were sitting right here, would say there's a real simple answer to that, Robert. Pay up. Just pay what you said you're going to pay. Pay your 2% or whatever the assigned percentage is. Just pay that. And he said, then it's all fine. Don't worry about it. As he just said, and I guarantee when Trump supporters hear that, pay your bills, they're like, yes, they're rapturous about that. Stop treating America like suckers, like we have to police and protect everyone. There are, of course, within NATO, domestic political realities that you cannot change as a U.S. president. You can influence at the margins, and you understand that bringing those countries along on their terms, maybe at their pace, is more helpful long-term to the preservation of that defensive alliance. But if you ignore all that and completely brush it aside, then that alliance, by its very nature, becomes more fragile. And if it becomes more fragile, Robert, it becomes what? More inviting. More inviting to whom? Vladimir Putin.
And just quickly here, Major, you heard Caitlin Huey-Burns' report. She says Nikki Haley is going to stay in through Super Tuesday in early March. Do you buy that?
I do. I think she has enough money and enough reserve capacity politically, and her energy level and her intensity about this is such that even if she gets shellacked in South Carolina, even if she loses by 10 or 20, she'll go on through Super Tuesday. But if she doesn't put up a single victory through Super Tuesday, there is nothing to keep campaigning for. There is only, in case of emergency, break glass candidacy, which is kind of where she is right now, absent any other shift in the polling data. But let's be honest, there's some glass that may need to be broken, and there might be an emergency situation come the middle of this year based on the court cases former President Trump is still facing. So that is her other backdoor rationale to stay in. But Super Tuesday, yeah, she'll be until then.
Major Garrett, thank you. And moving on, Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, now back in the hospital, and his duties have been transferred to his deputy. We'll go to the White House next. You're streaming America Decides.
Well, let me start with this.
This really happened.
Have you told the government?
Did any of that make sense?
What's your response?
You want me to just
What's wrong with that argument?
What have you learned?
Do you know why?
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 It's time for 60 Minutes, Sunday on CBS.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
Since you started La Soup in 2014, do you have any sense as to how much food you've rescued from the landfill?
We've rescued 4.5 million pounds.
I can't even fathom how much food that is.
And that's one little person in one little city in America. We're going to call this chicken piccata. We did 450 of these meals today.
This is the exact dish that you and I are going to have.
Yep.
Oh, really good.
Is it good? Mm-hmm. Having a plan of how to keep people fed should be in every single city.
If we eliminated food waste, could we eliminate
hunger? Yes.
Eating Trash, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
At this moment, terrorists could be plotting another attack.
9/11 triggered a counter-terrorist system that included a secret database.
This person needs a closer look.
A growing list of nearly 2 million people, including some Americans who say they're innocent.
For a 1-hour flight, I have to spend 6 hours to go and come back.
CBS Reports explores the system, the people responsible for it, and those pushing for change.
I'm not fighting against them. I'm fighting for them to do the right thing.
The Watchlist, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
He was there when the war in Ukraine started.
Extreme history. It's a big moment.
The extraordinary story behind Sean Penn's new Paramount Plus documentary, Superpower, when we go person to person.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
AI is among the most world-changing technologies ever.
Curing diseases, scientific breakthroughs, making lives better.
They can help us with medical discoveries, scientific discoveries, doing better agriculture, having cures for things like Alzheimer's.
It's also going to really transform the way we work.
The uplifting potential of artificial intelligence is limitless.
It gives you a friend, somebody to chat with 24/7.
that is non-judgmental. He makes me feel loved and desired.
And so are its downfalls.
The problem with all this AI is that it's unpredictable and uncontrollable.
The choices we make now will have lasting effects for decades, maybe even centuries.
The ChatGPT revolution, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
It's like a screenplay, something straight out of Hollywood.
Human remains found this week.
The mystery would haunt investigators for years.
A gripping true crime original, 48 Hours, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
How can we become our best selves? That may be more about character than talent.
The ultimate mark of your potential is how far you've climbed, not how high you've gone.
Realizing your true potential with Adam Grant as we go person to person.
Welcome back to America Decides. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin has canceled his trip to Brussels to meet with NATO ministers this week as he remains in the hospital for what the Pentagon is saying is an emergent bladder issue. Secretary Austin underwent a non-surgical procedure under general anesthesia. The secretary's official duties are currently being handled by his deputy. Officials say he will be monitored overnight and is expected to resume his duties tomorrow. CBS News senior White House and political correspondent Ed OKeefe joins us now. Ed, thanks for being here. What is the White House's response and handling of this situation?
Well, they're much more pleased with how the transparency around this one went. The announcement, of course, came Sunday during the Super Bowl that the secretary was being moved back to Walter Reed. Today, there was no word on whether the president and the secretary spoke, but there was also no concern expressed about his ability to continue doing the job. And the fact that he was just under general anesthesia, had a non-surgical procedure, and is expected to be back on the job on Tuesday is encouraging. The fact that he also transferred his duties to his deputy while all of this was underway today is another perhaps more encouraging sign for those that worry about transparency and continuity of government, making sure that somebody isn't distracted by some personal matter when they're supposed to be overseeing a department as sprawling as the Pentagon. But it's a reminder that this is a defense secretary who obviously has some pretty serious health issues, but is surrounded by an operation that can continue despite him.
Ed, there's a new ABC News poll out about who the country believes is more fit to be president. Let's look at that for a moment. The question being asked is President Biden, former President Trump, are they fit to be president for a term in 2025? And as you see on the screen there, 27% for President Biden, 59% for both, 11% for neither. What do you make of this latest poll?
Well, it's a sign that perhaps the Biden campaign's team to try to equalize this issue and point out the former president's own gaffes and missteps may be catching on. But it's also another reflection of the fact that most Americans understand they're too old. Doesn't mean they're not necessarily fit to do it. And I think that's part of what we need to continue to flesh out in polling. We've talked to our buddy Anthony Salvanto about this as the campaign progresses. Is it that you think being too old disqualifies you, or you just prefer that somebody younger do it? Is it that you don't want that person to serve anymore, or you just sort of have sympathy for the fact that somebody that age feels the need to run for president? And then is age a reason why you would go looking for somebody else? Be that an independent candidate, somebody gets nominated by one of the smaller parties. We'll just have to wait and see. But it's a reminder, especially after last week's special counsel report and even the former president's comments perhaps over the weekend, that there continue to be concerns about both of these contenders and whether or not they'll be able to serve out a full 4 years.
Ed, what about the Vice President Harris? She has been giving a series of interviews recently. I read one this morning in the Wall Street Journal.
Yeah.
Is she becoming, as ever, a central part of this reelection campaign? And what do you make of her public comments, especially in the last few days, in terms of how she's been on the defensive of her running mate, President Biden, and not only of their record, but of what a second term could look like and their ability to lead in that capacity?
Her comments Friday in defense of the president and in attacking the special counsel were some of the most forceful I've ever seen from her in terms of bucking up the president directly, saying that the report by Robert Hur was politically motivated and not reflective of the president she works alongside every day. The issue, of course, for voters is they don't get to sit and work alongside him every day. She does. So while she can pay testament to the work they do together. It's not necessarily something voters have seen themselves from a president who's far less public. But what was perhaps most interesting is what the vice president then did on Saturday. We reported earlier today that she hosted a meeting of a handful of battleground state governors and recent elected governors in the Democratic Party at her house for about 3 hours to go over campaign strategy, to hear them out, and to get their concerns expressed so that she can take that back to the president and his campaign team as things continue. And she heard, most especially from these governors, we're told, that he needs to do a better job campaigning sharply and aggressively on the issue of preserving or defending abortion rights, and then the issue of immigration, which they feel has been hijacked by Republican lawmakers in recent weeks, who first demanded the president try to come up with a deal. He then blessed the bipartisan talks, and then as soon as they were unveiled, had them essentially opposed by Republicans who blocked it. They say that is the kind of thing that the president should be out forcefully calling out and denouncing on a regular basis. And what was most intriguing for guys like you and me who follow this stuff on a regular basis, Bob, is who was around the dining room table at the vice president's residence with her. Governor Walz of Minnesota, Governor Evers of Wisconsin, two powerful Midwestern governors who easily won, didn't easily win re-election, but won re-election in 2022. But also Gretchen Whitmer of Michigan, J.B. Pritzker of Illinois, Wes Moore of Maryland, Roy Cooper of North Carolina, and Josh Shapiro of Pennsylvania. It's those last few names especially that's intriguing. While they're all on board with Biden, and none of them discuss the possibility of removing him from the ticket, a handful of those governors might face the vice president in a future White House Democratic primary. And so while they are partners now and committed to getting the president reelected, let's see how it is after Election Day later this year, as some of those around that dining room table may be thinking about their own futures, despite whatever the vice president may be planning.
Ed O'Keefe, thank you for your reporting and your insights. Much appreciated.
Take care.
The Senate has passed a procedural vote to advance the $95 billion foreign aid bill. That sets up a final passage vote later this week. Although some senators have opposed the legislation, might seek to delay that final vote. If the bill makes it out of the Senate, its fate remains unclear. Once it reaches the House of Representatives, there's a lot of opposition there. And there are concerns that Speaker Mike Johnson, a Republican, won't even hold a vote on that Senate legislation. Meanwhile, former President Trump racking up endorsements from many Republicans on Capitol Hill who previously criticized his actions in and around January 6th. We'll discuss how the tides have turned in the 3 years since the attack on the Capitol in terms of endorsements. You're streaming America Decides.
Hey there, welcome to the Uplift.
I thought she was a groom, and I stepped back and I went, oh, you're the queen. She's going to be with me every instant that I'm alive.
I just wanted to see if you'd go to Disneyland with me today.
I look over at him and he's smiling.
I'm going to remember that the rest of my life.
They told us when he was going to be born, he was only going to live for 30 minutes. It's really a miracle that he's with us today.
The Uplift. Stream now on the free CBS News app.
There is no more room in our city.
New York City is receiving record numbers of migrants.
Today, we're going to have more than 500 adults and children come through that door.
Tensions rise as shelters reach max capacity.
We don't have to take care of them.
CBS Reports goes inside a crisis cities and families are facing as they fight to survive.
The United States still has that glimmer of hope for people to come here.
Fighting for a future. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
She's a country music legend, philanthropist, fashion icon, and now rock star.
I think there's a lot to be said about being comfortable with who you are.
Find out what's next for Dolly Parton when we go person to person.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
That desired farm is a wonderful place to raise children, and it still is.
Promises broken.
Black Americans have been the target of racism and discrimination pretty much from the time they acquired ownership in the land.
Costing black farmers hundreds of billions in generational wealth.
They did everything to make sure we were run off that land.
But communities are uniting to continue the fight.
Collective ownership is powerful.
To keep their land and their dreams alive.
To watch my children play on land that we own means everything.
So land is power.
Most definitely.
40 Acres and a Mule, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
She is a beloved American icon and head of a media empire. But is Oprah Winfrey happy? How do you define happiness?
Yeah, I call it happiness.
Find out when we go person to person.
An original documentary from CBS reports.
It was genocide, a deliberate effort by the United States government to eliminate the food source that was relied upon by Native American tribes.
American bison were slaughtered and Native Americans displaced.
And that's how tribes were subjugated to reservations and our lands were taken.
But now, through conservation efforts at Yellowstone,
Buffalo provided everything that we needed. Now they need help.
a herd grows.
We need to step up and help them.
And a culture is reborn.
When the buffalo return and come back, that's when our tribe will begin to heal.
Yellowstone Bison Revival, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Welcome back to America Decides. 3 years ago, former President Donald Trump faced fierce criticism from some Republicans following what happened on January 6th, the Capitol attack. These days, many of those same Republican legislators now supporting the former president's bid for the White House in 2024. CBS News politics reporter Hunter Woodall joins us now here at the table. Hunter, thanks for being here. You wrote a recent piece for CBS News, did a lot of reporting on Capitol Hill about how this tide has turned in terms of how Republicans in Congress perceive Trump, talk about Trump, and endorse Trump. What's the most important thing you found?
Well, it's fascinating, Bob, is as you well know, right after January 6th, there was that, initial bit of criticism. There were people saying, hey, President Trump at that time was wrong to have said, okay, implying that the results could be overturned on Jan 6th. And when you look at that initial tenor, it's almost completely faded. I mean, let's be clear, former President Trump is, the front runner in the GOP presidential primary race right now. Clearly, he had the most congressional endorsements really this whole cycle. There were a few for Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, but there's one for former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley. By and large, what we've seen is that, Trump has maintained his hold on the GOP, and that's been seen by what we're seeing in these statements. I mean, when I talk to members of Congress who, were critical after January 6th of the violence, have since endorsed him, I, read them their past statements, and they said, oh, I didn't say that, or said, no, I don't agree with that anymore.
What explains the shift?
Simply, it's, Trump still has that influence. I mean, it was fascinating. I talked to Texas Congressman Ronnie Jackson, who, longtime Trump supporter, obviously was a former White House physician under Trump. And what struck me was he said, look, some people badmouth former President Trump after Jan 6th. They thought this was going to be the end of him politically. It wasn't. They realized, hey, he still has power. He still has influence. And as Congressman Jackson said, that showed a lot about them at that point.
What about, Hunter, in terms of how Republican lawmakers articulate their views about those who were present at the riot, participated at the riot? What are the terms they use now to describe them? Is it alleged domestic terrorist, insurrectionist, or hostages if they've been prosecuted?
Bob, that was one of the most striking things I found. When you look at those first initial statements, after January 6th, the days that followed, when Trump was impeached by the House, you saw people use the term insurrectionist, among congressional Republicans. You saw people say domestic terrorism, domestic terrorist. That's faded away. There's still the strong sense of, hey, we condemn the violence, but they are not using such strong terms. And that obviously, goes with, as we're seeing, former President Trump maintaining that power, maintaining that hold amongst congressional Republicans.
Hunter Woodall, we appreciate your reporting. Thank you very much. And that does it for us today. We'll be back with another edition of America Decides tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern. You're streaming CBS News.
Original documentary from CBS reports tensions rising between a powerful